On October 14th, 2025, Microsoft officially ended support for Windows 10. While a select number of Windows 10 SKUs will still receive security updates for the time being, with the main consumer and business versions of Windows 10 no longer being supported, the vast majority of Windows 10 users are now out of support. Now I know I'm pretty late with this video, but a lot of that is because I honestly just haven't really known what to think about that. There's also one small issue with this, which is that I am one of those people that still uses Windows 10 today. And statistically, you could be too. According to StatCounter, Windows 10 is still used on over 40% of Windows PCs worldwide. And when you consider that there are probably billions of PCs in the wild as a result, I don't think it's unfair to say that there are probably hundreds of millions of computers out there that are still running Windows 10 that are now unsupported. This is a little bit shocking because one of the whole points of Windows 10 back when it was first launched in 2015 is that it was supposed to be designed as a service. Essentially, it was called the last version of Windows because it would be this always updating, evolving platform. And yet here we are. Windows 10 is officially dead, and there's a pretty big reason for this. You're probably already aware, in 2021, Microsoft announced Windows 11. Despite claiming and designing Windows 10 to be the last version of Windows, Microsoft decided to announce the next version of Windows. And this obviously caused a lot of confusion, and meant that it was pretty much over for Windows 10. For me personally, while Windows 10 added some pretty nice features over Windows 7 and 8, I also had several pretty big issues with it. As with basically any other version of Windows, I, unsurprisingly, had a lot of driver issues and just stability issues in general with Windows 10, particularly in its early years. It wasn't in the oven for very long, and it showed in places. But the whole point of Windows 10, like I said, is it was always evolving, which means they kept developing it and releasing new feature updates over time. So Windows 10, when it launched, was very different from Windows 10 today. And I covered this in a video already that statistically you didn't see because it did absolutely terribly. But Windows 10 improved over time, at least for me anyway. Some people haven't had any issues with it at all, and others can't stand it. It really just is a mixed bag. But I have other issues with Windows 10 that really are more fundamental issues with how the operating system was designed. Windows 10, more or less, is the first version of Windows, I feel, that really took away a lot of control from the user over their computer. One of the biggest changes in Windows 10 was forced updates. Now, automatic updates aren't a new thing in Windows at all. It's been standard since at least Windows XP. But traditionally in Windows, you have the option of choosing your update settings. If you want the convenience of having an automatically updating system, you can set it that way. If you don't want any updates at all, maybe you're on a computer that just doesn't need them, you can turn them off. Traditionally, how I set my Windows machines up when I can is I will set it to check for updates, but only notify me so that I can install them at a time when it's convenient. And with Windows 10, that control is just gone. They've since added some features like active hours and the ability to delay updates for up to 35 days, but these are only band-aids. They don't fix the core problem. For me, back in those days, I had a much slower internet connection than I do now, and in some cases a mechanical hard drive as well. And these two things meant that having Windows updates just run automatically when the system felt like it was kind of a problem, especially because Windows updates are these massive things. They don't install in 30 seconds. Sometimes they can take hours. Windows 10 also expanded Microsoft accounts, which were introduced in Windows 8. They became a lot more prevalent in Windows 10. This was part of trying to tie everything Windows into the cloud. Now, of course, there's going to be benefits, and there's going to be drawbacks of this. Mostly to do with data collection. And speaking of which, data collection was another pretty big problem with Windows 10. When Windows 10 first came out, it was automatically set to send full diagnostic information. including full typing data. Nowadays, this is called optional diagnostic data, and you do have an option to reduce the amount of data, but out of the box, there's no way to completely turn this all off. And if you value your privacy, then there's a pretty big reason to be upset by that. Another issue that I had with it later on in Windows 10's life is that BitLocker would be automatically enabled on new computers, at least if you signed in with a Microsoft account. Now, having automatic device encryption is something that might sound good on paper, but first of all, it's obviously not necessary on every computer. I don't think I need to explain why forcing BitLocker onto unsuspecting customers who don't know what it is and don't understand it is a really terrible idea. These are some of the issues in Windows 10 that I have with it anyway. There's some other nitpicky things I have, like, for example, I really don't care for the UI of Windows 10, particularly because I don't think it's very well designed for either a desktop or a tablet experience, which is kind of a bit sad since one of the biggest goals of Windows 10 was merging that experience into one platform after Windows 8 was a big failure. But this stuff is subjective, and what I think about Windows 10 may or may not be what you think about Windows 10. I'm speaking as somebody who is an enthusiast, but enthusiasts only make up a very small portion of the people that use computers. And Windows 10 seems like a pretty enticing upgrade anyway. It was offered free to anybody that had Windows 7, 8, or 8.1, and you'd be surprised at how well that kind of thing works. Plus, there are tools and other tweaks and things that you can do to Windows 10 to make it a more bearable experience. And from late 2016 onwards, new computers had to be sold with Windows 10. I think it's pretty fair to see why Windows 10's market share got as high as it did. For consumers at least, many people were just willing to put up with it. Now the burning question is, if I hate Windows 10 so much, as I've been mostly complaining about it, why am I using it on my computer? Well, there's a couple things to consider. First is the obvious answer, which is software compatibility. But second, like I said before, there are ways to make Windows 10 not as bad. I particularly have my own way of doing things, installing my own programs, making my own tweaks, and some people also avoid regular Windows 10 altogether and instead install LTSC Windows 10, which is not only a version of Windows 10 that has much more support, but also has much less Microsoft bloatware on it. But the other reason I've stuck with Windows 10, even after all this time, is for something else that we're going to get into right now, which is Windows 11. When Windows 11 was first announced, I honestly was just kind of confused, specifically because it went against their whole service idea that they had started with Windows 10, and also because it didn't really look like there was a whole lot to Windows 11. I of course tried the leaked build 21996, and later when it released to the general public, I did install it on my computer for a little while, but my thoughts remained the same. It just didn't really seem like a worthwhile upgrade to me. The only obvious change to me was an entirely new UI, and some of the built-in apps being redesigned, which you could argue falls under the different UI point anyway. That's basically about it. It was the same kind of problem that Windows 10 had back when it was first released, which is that it wasn't being developed for very long, and how Windows 11 was developed was even more unusual. Now, at the time of recording this video, it's been a couple years since then, and Windows 11 has now received a few major feature updates. The UI has received some improvements, and it seems like Microsoft is finally fixing up their UI and trying to get rid of all of the UI inconsistencies that have been present in Windows since at least the Windows Vista days. I also mentioned earlier that they did redesign some of the built-in apps, and the two for me that particularly stand out are the Microsoft Store and Settings apps, because those two were probably the worst apps on Windows 10. But otherwise, even after all this time, I honestly can't really say that I'm aware of anything else that Windows 11 has that is really noteworthy over Windows 10, at least that is a benefit to me. And while I do think that the new UI is far better than Windows 10's. That kind of thing is going to be subjective, and I've talked to people who don't care for Windows 11's UI either. Does modifying the UI and changing nothing else constitute an entire new operating system? I'm not sure that I would say yes. What's made this even stranger is that Microsoft has been slowly making changes to Windows 10 through cumulative updates based on things that they have been doing to Windows 11. They've been backporting apps from Windows 11 to Windows 10. They've been backporting UI elements from Windows 11 to Windows 10. The kind of things that would differentiate the two, they've been adding to Windows 10, which just seems like an absolutely strange decision. And I haven't even gotten into the problems of Windows 11. Windows 11 still has a lot of the same issues that I had with Windows 10 in regards to data collection and the cloud integration, lack of control over your device really. It still has forced updates, it still turns BitLocker on a new computer. You now have to have a Microsoft account. It's no longer optional at all. And in fact, just recently, news broke that Microsoft has removed some of the methods that people have been using to make a local account on Windows 11 in the latest Insider Preview build. It still has ads throughout the operating system. They've begun making it so if you don't sign up for every Microsoft service that is thrown at you on the out-of-box experience, it constitutes a PC that has not been fully set up. And after a while, it will load the out-of-box experience again and make you try to sign into things like Windows Backup, Microsoft OneDrive, try and get you to buy Microsoft 365. I've even had times where it tries to get me to sign up for Xbox Game Pass in here. This is just stuff that's completely unnecessary. There's just so many ways that I personally feel that Windows 11 is so just unbelievably anti-consumer in a way that's even worse than Windows 10. So with the exception of the UI, all of the other changes in Windows 11 are bad. And of course, with the AI boom that's been going on for the last 3 years, Windows 11 has since gained AI features with Copilot, which is something they were so proud of that once again they backported that to Windows 10. And essentially the entire marketing for Windows 11 now appears to be centered around Copilot, how you've got this AI companion, and it's just not something that's appealing to me, and judging by what I've seen, it's not appealing to a lot of people. And I don't even think I need to explain all of the potential privacy concerns around the AI components alone. There just really isn't a whole lot here that is genuinely compelling enough, at least to me anyway, that outweighs all of the negatives of Windows 11. Especially lately with a constant stream of Windows updates that are just breaking the OS even more. I want to talk now about the marketing for Windows 11 from Microsoft themselves. This is something that I hadn't really looked at since 2021 when Windows 11 first came out, but was something I did discover while making my Windows 10 retrospective video. The first thing you might notice is I have two tabs pulled up here and they both mention AI within like the first 5 words. We've got experience the power of AI and this other tab, which we'll get to in a second, which literally mentions Copilot as the first thing, but like this is the official Windows page, and it's not experience the power of Windows, this is experience the power of AI with Windows. So the first thing is there really isn't a whole lot to this website on the surface, but we have the option to explore Windows 11's new features, which you actually have to click here, not where the text is. But we click Learn More, and that's what brings us to this page, which immediately prompts us with Copilot. We've got AI-powered features, make Windows 11 the best version yet. Learn more about AI features. Meet the computer you can talk to. You can't see it because this picture is so incredibly low quality, but it's got Copilot open on the taskbar and a Copilot key on the keyboard. Oh, holy crap, this is just incredibly bad website design. Share your screen with Copilot Vision. Copilot is there to brainstorm with you. It's all Copilot! We finally scroll down through this mess and we get to the best Windows yet, which mentions Copilot PCs. You got Stay in Sync with Phone Link, which I'm sure might be beneficial to somebody, but not to me. Edit photos with AI-powered Clip Champ. Save what's on screen. Okay, I'll give them this. This is new to Windows 11, and Snipping Tool seems far better. An app for anything. Use the Microsoft Store. Windows 11 works how you work best. Now, you would think that there are much more features to Windows 11 than just these 6 things, because there's this scroll bar thing, but when you click on it, it just loads the exact same 6 things it showed the first time. So, what is the point of this? But again, more Copilot stuff, and that's it. Like 90% of this page is just Copilot. And if you don't care about it, there's nothing else really here. They've got a couple more things linked here, but you click Meet Windows 11 and it brings you to the exact same page that I just was on. I've been checking some other websites right now just because I want to make sure that I'm not just going insane on the difference between Windows 11 and Windows 10, but it's all things that, at least to me, just don't matter. The only other thing that I have seen that I did forget about is there's this UI on Windows 11 you can use to reorganize windows. You can snap them a certain way, but I mean, you could already do a similar kind of thing with Windows 10. I mean, you don't quite get the same sort of flexibility that you do, so there is that. But they do have their own compare Windows page where you can compare Windows 11 to Windows 10. We've got the obvious one, which is the new UI, which I will give them this solely because, as I mentioned already, I don't really care for the Windows 10 UI. Smart recommendations in File Explorer. Windows 10 already has like recently used files on there. It does have File Explorer tabs, I will give them that, but this is the kind of thing that feels like it should have been in Windows like 20 years ago. There are some things here that seem good on paper at least, but I haven't looked that deep into. Like there's passkeys. We've got Auto HDR, which is part of the gaming push, I guess. Dynamic lighting, they've got RGB settings, live captions. I think for me what's more surprising is the amount of things that they have listed here that show up as check marks for both Windows 11 and 10. I'd say it's more things that are on both operating systems than things that are just on Windows 11. The only thing I can think of why, beyond there just not being a whole lot to this, is that maybe it's to try and make it so that you would be familiar with Windows 11. Windows 10 worked well with touch inputs. Windows 11 was designed with them in mind, just like how Windows 10 was designed with them in mind. Search is still garbage on Windows 11, so I don't really buy this. I find it funny that widgets are here, considering, again, they had gadgets in Windows Vista and took them out. But like so many of these things here are things that are also on Windows 10, so why would you upgrade to this? But I've saved the worst for last. The real reason why I'm so upset about Windows 11 doesn't even have anything to do with the OS itself. Rather, it's system requirements. Microsoft, fortunately, have it on their website. It's a Microsoft support article that goes into the Windows 11 system requirements. As you can see, there's quite a lot of things to consider here. We'll start off with the easy ones. Windows 11 needs 4 GB of RAM. That's fine, that's pretty reasonable. You need 64 GB of storage. In my opinion, it should be a solid-state drive, but it doesn't explicitly say. You need a DirectX 12 compatible graphics card, which these have been around for quite a long time. You have to have an internet connection and a Microsoft account during device setup. I think I've already briefly touched on that before. Not really a fan of this. It might sound hard to believe, but in the state that I live in, internet connectivity is still extremely spotty to even non-existent the further you go north. So this is still not something that everybody can do. But here's where things get really interesting. You need a UEFI machine with Secure Boot, which isn't actually as crazy as it might seem, because these have been around at least for a long time, since the early Windows 8 days. That's still a pretty big range of computers, at least, like 2012 or so. You need to have a TPM 2.0 module in your computer. Now, all computers for the last while now usually have some kind of TPM module. TPM 2.0 was introduced in about 2014 or so. So you would think that every computer after that would have a TPM 2.0 chip. I've seen several sources say that you have to have a TPM 2.0 chip in order for a computer to be able to ship with Windows 10 since at least 2015 or 2016, but that's just not true. Many computers I've seen, especially cheaper ones, often only have a TPM 1.2 module. Even higher-end business laptops like my HP EliteBook from 2017 only has a TPM 1.2 chip. And it's not something you can just easily replace either. It's usually a soldered component on the motherboard or even built into the processor. And speaking of which, the CPUs. Processor requirements are that you have a 1 GHz or faster CPU with 2 or more cores. Now this on its own, I think is pretty reasonable. We've had dual-core CPUs for like 20 years now. Also not listed here is you need a 64-bit CPU, but that also isn't really that insane since we've had 64-bit CPUs basically standard for almost 2 decades. However, that's not where it ends, because there's also this part. There is a list of approved CPUs. So what is this list? Well, it brings you to this Microsoft Learn article about Windows processor requirements, and this goes far beyond just Windows 11. It mentions Windows 7, 8, and all of the many Windows 10 versions. Let's take a look at supported Intel processors for Windows 11. There shouldn't be any difference, so I'll just go with 24H2 as you can see. But as you might be able to notice, there's not actually that many processors here. Indeed, it seems to be about as old as 8th generation Intel Core processors. Now, I'm not as familiar with the Celeron, Pentium, and Xeon chips that Intel also makes, but it seems like it's about the same kind of thing, roughly Coffee Lake or so. Taking a look at AMD processors, about the same kind of thing. It stops at about 2nd generation AMD Ryzen. Now, the weird thing about this list is that it makes it appear like this is only for OEMs, for when you're manufacturing a computer, but because they are using this for consumers as well, what that means is that if your CPU is not on this list, congratulations, it's not compatible with Windows 11. This is the first version of Windows that I'm aware of that actually has a processor whitelist in it. Technically, Windows 7 and 8 had processor blacklists in it. Intel Core 7th generation processors and brand new AMD Ryzen chips would not support Windows 7 and 8.1. If you tried to install them, it would know and prevent you from installing Windows updates, making Windows 10 the only officially supported version of Windows here. Well, they've done the exact opposite now. If your processor is too old, you can't install the latest version of Windows. One of the legitimate advantages of Windows 10 is it was basically universally compatible on any computer from the last 10 or 15 years. If you had a Windows Vista or Windows 7 computer, there was a decent chance there were at least enough drivers to get the machine working, and with the right hardware, you could get it working on something older than 20 years. It meant that you could get the latest, most up-to-date Windows version running on an older device. With Windows 11, that's just not the case. This just seemed ridiculous to me. I had to do some research on this because this was easily the most confusing requirement. At least with the TPM 2.0 and secure boot requirements, it was a bit obvious why it was there. But this one just didn't make sense to me at first, and I'm not alone because there are lots of people on forums who don't understand why this new operating system doesn't work on their computer that works perfectly fine. It is apparently because these older processors don't have something called VBS. This feature was created by Microsoft themselves and began being implemented in 8th generation Intel Core and 2nd generation AMD Ryzen processors. If this feature and TPM 2.0 had been around for a super long time, it was just in every computer from the last 10 years or so, I don't think it would be nearly as much of a problem. But it isn't. Many businesses and larger organizations often have their own policies anyway about replacing their computers after a few years, and those I think are going to be the places where security is going to be the most important. But for consumers, many hang on to their computers for a really long time. The problem is that it feels incredibly wasteful to basically consider anything from 2017 or older to be trash. On an unsupported device, there are so many advertisements from Microsoft themselves about recycling your computer and finding a new one. And not everybody out there really needs to have their hand held in regards to security. As long as you're pretty good with your computer, the chance of having a security issue is going to be extremely low. Not zero, but pretty low. Maybe I'm putting too much faith in consumers, but to not give people the choice is just so disappointing. And clearly, it isn't exactly hard to bypass. And in a lot of forum posts, including ones on Microsoft's official one, it seems that is the accepted solution. It just seems really confusing to make people jump through all these hoops so that they can keep using their computer that they paid for. And for the longest time, the other accepted solution was to just stay on Windows 10. But that option is now gone. It no longer receives security updates. And maybe I'm wrong, I'm not an expert all the time, but it seems far more unsecure to me to have potentially hundreds of millions of devices stop getting software updates than if they have a couple obscure security features. I still personally don't believe that there's any reason why it can't work on these old devices, given I've used it a lot in videos on the channel, and I use it that way on my own personal laptop. And I can't say that I've had a problem with it after many years. And if this is how it's going to be, and Windows 11 is really this security titan that Windows 10 just wasn't, I feel at the minimum they should be providing more support to those who are still running Windows 10. Obviously, they have a right to do what they want with the product they made, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Considering how many people still supposedly use Windows 10 today, 2025 just feels too early to kill off support for Windows 10. Windows 11 is still the same foundation as Windows 10. It's still the same kernel number. Its development structure is exactly the same as Windows 10. It still receives yearly feature updates and new insider preview builds every couple weeks. And I just honestly refuse to believe that it's impossible to implement a lot of the features in Windows 11 into Windows 10. The whole point of Windows 10 was it was supposed to be updated. In fact, a lot of these security features also were in Windows 10, and we didn't have a problem then. Windows 11 to me is just a mess. I'm not sure I would call it the worst version of Windows, but it's gotta be up there, unfortunately. And I think I'm being nice, to be honest. I've seen plenty of people go a lot harder on Windows 11 than I have. Now, I did install it on my personal laptop because I wanted to give it a fair shot before I started crapping on it. But even after many years of development, I still believe that Windows 11 is just a confusing operating system. It doesn't really bring a lot of improvements to most people. In certain areas, it's basically spyware. There's a lot less control over your device, so there's a certain chance you can't even install it properly on your device. It just kind of feels to me like Microsoft is giving up on Windows. They don't really need to try as hard as they maybe once had to. Doesn't really matter if they do shitty things, people are still going to use Windows. There's obviously going to be people in the enthusiast space who are going to switch to Linux and who don't really care for Windows. But the overwhelming majority of people aren't going to do that. It's not going to go away. And for that reason, I don't want Windows to suck, but I'm just not confident that Windows 11 is going to recover from here. The reason this is relevant now is because with the end of Windows 10 security updates, there's no longer a choice. To my knowledge, this is going to be the first time, in a very long time anyway, that there is only going to be one version of Windows available, at least for consumers. That's Windows 11. For this reason alone, it seems like Windows 11 market share is skyrocketing. What stood out to me was when I was taking a look at the data on StatCounter, not just what the number is currently, but taking a look back at the pattern over time of market share of Windows 11. What it shows is that even years after Windows 11 released, when given the choice between Windows 10 and Windows 11, users overwhelmingly stuck with Windows 10. Only until this year, Windows 11's market share has just been terrible. I wouldn't be surprised if a large chunk of this too is just in new PC sales, not existing computers being upgraded. And its market share trajectory, in a lot of ways, mirrors that of Windows Vista and Windows 8/8.1, operating systems that were hated basically from the moment they released, and never really achieved a super high market share because successors came out quickly enough that they were dropped basically immediately. But that's just not the case with Windows 11. I'm not really sure what the future holds, but I'm not confident that the successor to Windows 11 is gonna really be that good. Windows 11 to me should have been that chance to really improve over some of the problems of Windows 10, and they just haven't done it. In fact, it's even worse. It's more than obvious that they are just banking on the AI components in Windows to be a selling point. I mean, that's basically the only major feature they advertise. I still maintain the opinion that the death of Windows 10 really isn't something that needed to happen. These kinds of things could have been done in Windows 10. Even the new UI could have been something that they introduced in Windows 10 eventually. In fact, that's basically what happened in the dev preview builds. They just switched over to the Windows 11 user interface. Hell, they could have even pulled an Xbox 360 and called it the new Windows experience or something. People might be up in arms about it at the time, but I think it's far better to do it that way than to make an entire new operating system to just change the UI. And that's how most people are gonna see it. And I already mentioned I don't know what the future looks like. I mean, obviously, but I would not be surprised if there's going to be a large chunk of users that are still going to be using Windows 10 for the time being. Another observation I made while perusing through the data is that even once Windows XP and Windows 7 went out of support, they still maintained a pretty big chunk of users for a couple more years. And Windows 10's market share currently is much higher than Windows 7's market share in January of 2020. I'll be curious to see what the data looks like over the next several months, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to take years to fully get people off of Windows 10, either because they can't upgrade, they don't know that there are ways to install it on an unsupported device, or they simply don't want Windows 11 and aren't willing to install Linux or some other operating system. Now, as for me personally, what am I gonna do? Well, I already mentioned that I did install Windows 11 on my personal laptop. My laptop is pretty old and is not officially supported, but it works just fine on there. I certainly have my complaints with the operating system, but similarly to Windows 10, I think by this point I've largely gotten it set up the way I prefer. So while I'm not happy about using it, it technically works fine. But this is a device I used to run Linux on, and I wouldn't be shocked if I go back to it later. My desktop is a system that is still running Windows 10. I brought it up in the beginning of this video. And this is pretty much for one reason, which is that this computer has one job, which is to work. It doesn't need the newest features or updates or anything. It just needs to be a stable computer that is ready whenever I need it, because when this computer is not working or is not available to me, I can't really do a whole lot else around here. This is how I make my videos, and why I stuck with Windows 10 despite not really caring for it all that much. I actually was going to show a lot more footage related to this because I had like proper plans for this video, but I was going to put Windows 11 on the computer under one condition, that I could get it to do an in-place upgrade, because that was going to be the easiest way to make it so my computer would keep working like how it did before. But because it's never that easy, this didn't happen. Windows 11 24H2 just wouldn't install on this computer. It would get pretty close, but after it installed the drivers and attempted to reboot, it simply would just crash and revert everything back to how it was before, which seems kind of wild to me because this is a 2022 computer that doesn't have compatible drivers for a 2024 operating system. This is the kind of thing I would have expected on an unsupported device, like my laptop, not a supported AM5 computer that's not that old. So for the time being, it's staying on Windows 10 because doing a clean install is just not something I have any interest in doing right now. Now, I did come up with a solution for this. I'm not going to go into details, but what I will say is, if you know, you know. And finally, as for things in future videos, well, it's probably going to be pretty unlikely that any computer I show will be running Windows 10 unless it's a 32-bit machine that I wanted to install a modern version of Windows on, or because I specifically wanted it for that video. Most Windows machines are going to be running Windows 11 when is reasonable, or are just going to be running Linux. It still just feels surreal to me that this is even a situation going on. It's not that long ago that Windows 10 was still receiving new feature updates. It seemed like with the end of Windows 7 and 8, it was finally going to be that all Windows 10 software as a service future. And now, just a few years later, it's out of support. It really feels like this should be a turning point of some sorts. That would mean Linux finally grows a lot more than it currently has. But unfortunately, that just does not seem likely.